It was my sister's wedding day, a grand event in every sense of the word. Glittering chandeliers rose of extravagant floral arrangements, and an audience dressed to the nines made it clear that no expense had been spared. I stood awkwardly in a corner, clutching a glass of water, trying my best to stay invisible in a sea of designer gowns and tailored suits. My parents had made it very clear that I didn't belong in this glittering spectacle of perfection. "You're lucky we even let you attend," my mother hissed under her breath earlier that day. As I slipped into a simple dress, "We didn't want you embarrassing us in front of our guests." Her words stung, but I swallowed the pain. My parents had always been critical, but today their contempt felt sharper. It wasn't just their disapproval, it was the outright humiliation that awaited me as the evening unfolded. The moment came during the wedding toast. My father took the microphone, standing tall and confident, and began to speak. "Today, we celebrate our beautiful daughter Victoria," he said, his voice ringing with pride. "She has always made us proud." Unlike his gaze swept toward me, and I froze, every nerve in my body screaming for me to disappear. "Unlike some people in this family who have done nothing but bring us shame." The room fell silent save for a few gasps from the crowd. My cheeks burned as every pair of eyes turned toward me. It was a public flogging, one designed to remind everyone in the room of my failure. In their eyes, tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Instead, I clenched my fists and looked away, focusing on a distant point in the room as my father continued his toast, praising my sister's achievements while throwing more veiled insults my way. I wanted to run, but my feet felt like lead. Then I heard voice, strong, calm, and cutting through the tension like a blade. "That's enough." The crowd parted as Liam stepped forward. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, his presence commanding and undeniable. My heart raised as he approached, his jaw set in a way that told me he wasn't about to let this slide. "Who are you to interrupt this?" my father snapped, his face flushed with anger. "I'm the man who loves your daughter," Liam replied, his voice steady but laced with an unmistakable edge, "and I'm here to make something very clear." The room was deathly quiet. Everyone from the servers to the socialites was watching intently. Liam stepped up to the stage, taking the microphone from my father's stunned grip. "You call her a disgrace," he said, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "But let me tell you what I see. I see a woman who's strong, resilient, and far better than any of you give her credit for." The murmurs began, but Liam wasn't finished. "You belittle her, humiliate her, but you don't see the heart she has or the kindness she shows to people who actually deserve it. You don't deserve her, and frankly, your behavior tonight is more of a disgrace than anything she's ever done." Couldn't breathe. The weight of years of silent suffering lifted with every word Liam spoke. My parents looked furious, my sister mortified, but for the first time, I didn't care. Then Liam did something no one expected. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. He dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the hall with every guest watching. "I love you," he said, looking up at me with a sincerity that brought fresh tears to my eyes. "And I don't care what they think. Will you marry me?" The room erupted into chaos, gasps, cheers, and even protests from my parents, but none of it mattered in that moment. All I could see was Liam, the man who stood up for me when no one else did. "Yes," I whispered, my voice shaking 1,000 times. "Yes." The rest of the night was a blur. Liam's bold declaration had flipped the narrative, turning the focus from my parents' cruelty to the unexpected romance unfolding before their eyes. People who had looked at me with pity earlier now approached with congratulations, their shallow approval ringing hollow in my ears. But I didn't need their validation anymore. For the first time in my life, I felt free. That night marked the beginning of a new chapter, but it wasn't just a love story. It was a declaration of my worth, a reminder that I didn't need my parents' approval to be happy. And as for my parents, well, let's just say their desperate pleas for forgiveness would come sooner than I expected. The moment Liam slipped the ring onto my finger, the crowd erupted. Some cheered, others whispered behind their hands, but the deafening silence from my parents was what stood out the most. My mother's face was a mask of fury, her lips pressed so tightly together they turned white. My father, on the other hand, looked like he had been slapped in public, an expression of disbelief and barely contained rage. Liam stood, his hand firmly holding mine as he turned to face them. "It's clear you Don't value her, he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. But I do, and that's all that matters. Get. Al, my father barked, his voice trembling with anger. You've embarrassed this family enough for one evening. Liam chuckled, his confidence unshaken. Embarrassed? No, sir, I think you've managed that all on your own. I just gave her what she's always deserved, respect, before my father could respond. Liam pulled me toward the exit, his grip firm, yet comforting. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, and I felt a surge of power walking alongside him. For years I had been the invisible daughter, the one cast into shadows while my sister basked in the spotlight, but tonight Liam had made sure the world saw me, and not as a disgrace, but as someone worthy of love. When we finally left the venue, I was too overwhelmed to speak. Liam drove us to his apartment, a cozy space that felt more like home than my parents' mansion ever did. He handed me a glass of wine and sat beside me on the couch, his hand resting on mine. Talk to me, he said softly. How are you feeling? I don't even know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Part of me is relieved, but another part of me, I can't believe they did that in front of everyone. Liam's eyes darkened with anger. They've treated you like this for too long. Tonight was just the breaking point. I nodded, tears welling up again. I don't know how to move forward from this. They're my parents, but how do you forgive something like that? You don't have to, Liam said firmly. Forgiveness isn't something you owe them. You have every right to cut toxic people out of your life, even if they family. His words lingered in my mind long after we went to bed. For the first time, I started to consider the possibility of a life without their constant criticism, a life where I could finally be myself without fear of judgment. But the next morning, my phone was flooded with messages. Most were from extended family members offering hollow apologies or trying to justify my parents' behavior, but the one message that caught my attention was from my sister Victoria. We need to talk. Meet me at the cafe on 5th at noon. Reluctantly, I agreed. When I arrived, Victoria was already seated, her usual air of confidence replaced by something that looked suspiciously like guilt. I want to start by saying I'm sorry, she began, her hands clasped tightly around her coffee cup. I didn't know they were going to do that. If I had, I would have stopped them. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Because you've never exactly stood up for me before. Her face flushed. I know, and I'm not proud of it, but last night even I was shocked. It wasn't fair to you. Time wasn't an easy one. Every fiber of my being screamed to leave the past buried, but I knew I needed closure, not for them, but for myself. Victoria insisted on coming with me, her presence a silent promise that I wouldn't face this battle alone. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe. Far from the familiarity of their mansion, the setting was ordinary, but the tension in the air was anything but. When my parents arrived, their expressions were unreadable, though my father's jaw was set in the way I recognized as barely concealed anger. We sat down, an uneasy silence stretching between us. Finally, my father spoke. So, what is this about? He asked, his tone clipped. This is about the damage you've done, I said, my voice steady but firm, and it's about letting you know that I'm done being the punching bag in this family. My mother scoffed, leaning back in her chair. Is that what you think, that we've been cruel to you? I don't think it, I replied sharply. I know what you spent my entire life making me feel like I wasn't good enough, like I was a disappointment, and at Victoria's wedding you made sure the whole world knew it. That's not how we saw it, my father said, his tone defensive. We were frustrated, yes, but we've always had your best interests at heart. Best interests? Victoria interjected, her voice incredulous. You humiliated her in front of hundreds of people. How is that in her best interests? My mother's eyes flicked to Victoria, her surprise evident. You're taking her side. I'm taking the side of what's right, Victoria shot back. You've spent years pitting us against each other, and I won't be part of it anymore. For a moment, my parents were silent, clearly taken aback by Victoria's defiance. Then my father leaned forward, his expression softening just enough to seem genuine. We didn't realize you felt this way, he said. We only wanted the best for you. That's not true, I said, refusing to let him manipulate the conversation. You wanted control, you wanted perfection, Tyan, and when I didn't fit your mold, you decided I wasn't worth your love. My mother's lips thinned, but she didn't deny it. You always misunderstood us, she said finally. We only pushed you because we saw potential. You pushed me because You wanted a version of me that didn't exist, I corrected, and in doing so, you destroyed any chance of us having a real relationship. The conversation continued, each word peeling back layers of unresolved pain. Victoria and I stood united, refusing to let them deflect or minimize their actions. By the end of the meeting, my parents were visibly shaken, their confidence eroded by the weight of the truths we had laid bare. "We not asking for your forgiveness," I said as I stood to leave. "We're asking for you to take responsibility for what you've done. If you're willing to do that, maybe one day we can rebuild something. But until then, this is goodbye." Walking out of that cafe felt like shedding a weight that I'd carried my entire life. For the first time, I felt free, not just from their expectations, but from the fear of losing their approval. Victoria and I walked in silence for a while before she finally spoke. That was brave. She said, "I don't think I could have done that without you. You're stronger than you think," I said, smiling at her. "We both are." The weeks following that meeting were transformative. Without the shadow of my parents' judgment looming over me, I threw myself into my work and my relationships. My design course became a source of pride, and with Liam's encouragement, I began freelancing for small businesses, creating logos and branding that allowed me to showcase my creativity. Victoria, too, was finding her footing. She started therapy, something neither of us had ever considered. Growing up in a family that viewed vulnerability as weakness, slowly she began to heal from the pressures of perfectionism, and our bond grew stronger with each passing day. Surprisingly, the fallout from the confrontation brought unexpected allies. Extended family members who had witnessed my parents' behavior reached out, offering apologies for not stepping in sooner. While their words didn't erase the past, they served as a reminder that I wasn't alone. One evening, as Liam and I sat on the balcony watching the sunset, he turned to me with a smile that made my heart skip a beat. "You've come so far," he said, his voice full of pride. "I think it's time we start building our future." I laughed, glancing at the ring already on my finger. "I thought we already were." "I mean officially," he said, pulling out a second ring. "This one, a simple band with our initials engraved inside. Leighton set a date." Tears filled my eyes as I nodded yes. That's the announcement of our wedding plans brought a new wave of emotions. While my parents remained distant, Victoria stepped into the role of maid of honor with enthusiasm, determined to make the day a celebration of love and resilience. The months leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of excitement, nerves, and unexpected moments of healing. Victoria threw herself into her role as maid of honor, helping with everything from venue selection to dress fittings. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of my life that I thought had been lost forever. One evening, as we sorted through color palettes and floral arrangements, she turned to me with a hesitant smile. "You know," she began, "I've always envied you." I blinked, caught off guard. "Me? What's there to envy? You've always been real," she said, her voice soft. "You didn't pretend to be someone you're not, even when it meant standing alone. I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect for them, and all it got me was emptiness." Her confession broke my heart. I reached out, squeezing her hand. "You don't have to be perfect anymore," I said. "We free now." As the guest list grew, the inevitable question arose: should we invite my parents? Liam, ever the voice of reason, left the decision to me. "It's your day," he said, his hand resting gently on mine. "If you want them there, we'll make it work. If not, that's okay too." After days of deliberation, I decided to send them an invitation, not as a gesture of forgiveness, but as a way to offer them one last chance to show they cared. Whether they accepted or not would speak volumes about where they stood. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received a reply from my parents. It wasn't a phone call or a heartfelt letter, just a cold, formal RSVP confirming their attendance. I couldn't help but wonder if they were coming out of genuine remorse or a desire to save face. Victoria, ever the optimist, tried to see the silver lining. "Maybe this is their way of trying," she suggested. "Even if it's not perfect, it's a step." I nodded, though my heart remained guarded. The wounds they'd inflicted were still fresh, and I wasn't ready to trust them just yet. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the perfect backdrop for the most important day of my life. As I stood in front of the mirror, dressed in a gown that made me feel like a queen, a wave of emotions washed over me. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who felt invisible, unworthy, and marveled at how far I'd come. Victoria entered the room, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You look Amazing, she said, her voice thick with emotion. So, do I replied, taking in her elegant maid of honor dress. Thank you for being here, for everything, she smiled, pulling me into a tight hug. You deserve this happiness, she whispered. Don't ever forget that the ceremony was everything I dreamed of, intimate, heartfelt, and filled with love. As I walked down the aisle toward Liam, I felt a sense of peace I'd never known before. He stood there, his eyes filled with unwavering love, and I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. But the reception brought its own challenges. My parents arrived late, their presence casting a shadow over an otherwise perfect day. They kept their distance, watching from the sidelines as Liam and I shared our first dance, their expressions unreadable. When they finally approached, it was during a quiet moment. As Liam and I stood by the balcony taking in the view, my father cleared his throat, drawing my attention. You look beautiful, he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Thank you, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. There was an awkward pause before my mother spoke. We wanted to say we're sorry for everything. Her words caught me off guard. I searched her face for sincerity and saw a flicker of something that looked like genuine regret. I appreciate that, I said slowly, but words aren't enough. If you truly want to make amends, it's going to take time and effort. They both nodded, their expressions somber. We understand, my father said, and we willing to try if you'll let us. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. My parents kept their distance, respecting my boundaries, while Victoria shone as the life of the party. Liam's family embraced me wholeheartedly, their warmth and acceptance filling the void my parents had left behind. As the night drew to a close, Liam and I stood on the dance floor, surrounded by friends and family who had become our true support system. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. This is just the beginning, he whispered. Our beginning, I smiled, my heart swelling with love and gratitude. I can't wait to see where it takes us. And as the music played and the stars glittered above, I knew I had finally found my happily ever after, not just in Liam, but in myself.